in the middle of cleaning out the garage when I found it. Not the tracker. That came later. I'm talking about the box of old tax returns my wife had organized. God, she organized everything going back to 1987. I sat on the concrete floor for 20 minutes just looking at her handwriting on the labels. She'd been gone 4 years by then, and sometimes her handwriting still hit me harder than anything else. That's where my head was when my daughter came by that afternoon, unannounced, which wasn't unusual for her. She'd been stopping in more often since her mother passed. I thought it was grief at the time. I thought she missed the house, missed the smell of it, missed having somewhere to belong. I was 63 when my wife died. 67 now. 4 years isn't long enough to stop reaching for someone in the middle of the night, but it's long enough to stop apologizing for the way your grief looks to other people. My daughter. I'll call her that throughout. Just my daughter. Had always been close to me, closer than my son, who moved to Edmonton 15 years ago and calls on birthdays and Christmas, which is enough for both of us. She lived 40 minutes away in Barrie, had 2 kids in school, and a husband I'd never fully warmed to. I want to be fair about him. He was never cruel to her, never cruel to the grandkids, but there was something careful about him, something calculated, like he was always running numbers in the back of his head and you were never quite sure what he was calculating. His name is not important. I'll just call him my son-in-law. That afternoon in the garage, she helped me carry some boxes to the basement and we had tea in the kitchen, and she asked how I was managing the property. Which struck me as a slightly odd way to put it. Not how are you doing, Dad? How are you managing the property? I told her fine. The house was paid off. I had my pension from 31 years with the municipality. I had some RRSPs my wife and I had been careful about, and I had the house, which had been assessed at just over $900,000 the previous spring. Not bad for a place we'd bought in 1991 for $160,000. She nodded at that like I'd confirmed something. I didn't notice at the time. I was telling a story about a raccoon that had gotten into the avestruz, and she was laughing and everything felt normal. It felt normal for another 3 months. It was February when I first noticed the car. I'm an early riser. Always have been. 6 o'clock, sometimes earlier, I'm up making coffee and I stand at the kitchen window and watch the street. It's a habit from working shift work for 15 years. A dark blue sedan had been parked across from the house 2 mornings in a row. Not directly in front. One house down, angled slightly. I noticed it the way you notice something without meaning to. The way your brain files it before your conscious mind catches up. 3rd morning, it was gone. I forgot about it. The following week, I had my friend coming over. We'd worked together at the municipality for over 20 years. He retired 2 years before I did. And we had a standing Tuesday morning arrangement. Coffee, sometimes a drive out to the conservation area if the weather cooperated. He has a good eye for people and a very low tolerance for nonsense, which I've always appreciated. That Tuesday, I mentioned the car almost as an afterthought. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me over his coffee mug. Then he said, "Do you want me to help you check the car?" I asked him what he meant. He said, and I remember this clearly because it seemed so far outside anything I'd considered. He said sometimes when someone wants to know where you're going, they don't just follow you. They make it easier on themselves. We went out to the driveway after we finished our coffee. My car was a 2018 Civic, nothing remarkable. The same grey color as half the cars in Ontario. My friend got down on one knee on the cold asphalt and ran his hand along the undercarriage. I stood there feeling slightly ridiculous. Then he stopped. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just held out his hand and I crouched down beside him and looked at where he was pointing. A small black device, magnetic, pressed flat against the frame just inside the rear wheel well. It was maybe the size of a deck of cards. There was a small indicator light on it that was not blinking. I don't think I said anything. My friend looked at me. I looked at my friend. He said, "That's not factory." We went back inside. I put it on the kitchen table and we sat across from it like it was going to explain itself. My friend pulled up some images on his phone and we went back and forth on it. GPS tracker, almost certainly. Consumer grade, the kind you could order online for under $200. Magnetic mount, long battery life. Not something a professional would use, he said. Something an amateur would buy on Amazon and think was clever. That word. Amateur. I kept turning it over because the only people who knew my routines, who knew which days I drove to Barrie, which days I went to the physiotherapist in Aurelia, which days I was home. The only people who had that kind of access to the shape of my life were people close to me. My friend asked if I had any enemies. I almost laughed. I'm a retired municipal road coordinator from Simcoe County. I approved culvert replacements and pothole budgets. I don't have enemies. I have neighbors who were annoyed about the placement of a stop sign 12 years ago. He said, so it's someone who knows you. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't tell my daughter right away. I didn't tell anyone except my friend. What I did instead, and I'm not sure where this instinct came from, was decide not to let on that I knew. I put the tracker back exactly where it was. I pressed it back against the frame, same angle, same position, and I stood up and brushed off my knees and went back inside. My friend thought I was being foolish. I told him I just needed a few days to think. What I actually needed was to understand what someone thought they were going to find. I started paying attention to things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way my daughter asked questions when she visited. Not dramatic questions, not obvious questions. Small ones. Have you thought about whether this house is too big for you, Dad? Have you had anyone look at the roof lately? You know, my son-in-law has a contact at a property management company if you ever want to look at your options. I'd brush these things off as concern. Now I heard them differently. I called my financial advisor and asked him to put together a summary of my assets. Just to have a clear picture, I told him. He emailed it to me by the end of the day. The house, the RRSPs, a TFSA my wife and I had contributed to steadily since the program started in 2009. Just under 1.3 million in total when you added it all up, the house included. Then I called my lawyer, not to do anything, just to talk. He's known me since before my wife died, handled her estate, and I trust him. I asked him a question that I hadn't even fully formed in my own mind until I heard my son say it out loud. I asked him, if someone wanted to move against my assets while I was still alive, without my consent, what would that look like? He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, it would look like power of attorney abuse. It would look like forged documents. It would look like someone who knew your financial picture very well and was counting on you not looking closely. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a very long time. My son-in-law worked in finance, not high finance. He was a broker at a mid-sized firm in Barrie. But he understood numbers. He understood structures. He understood how assets moved and how they could be made to move without making a lot of noise. 3 days later, I got an email from my lawyer. He'd been contacted, he said, by someone representing a power of attorney document in my name. The document authorized a financial agent, my son-in-law's name was on it, to manage my assets in the event of incapacitation. My lawyer had flagged it immediately because he knew I hadn't signed any such document. He'd asked for the original. The signature on it was not mine. I know my own handwriting. I've been signing my name the same way since I was 20 years old. The loop on the G, the way the letters lean slightly right, the pressure I put on the pen. The signature on that document was close. Someone had practiced it, but it wasn't mine. I went to the RCMP. I want to say that part clearly, because I know some people might wonder why I didn't go to my daughter first. Why I didn't give her the chance to explain. But here is the thing about finding a forged power of attorney document in your name. There is no version of that conversation that goes well over tea. There is no explanation that makes it okay. Either she knew about it and was part of it, or she didn't know and her husband had forged it without her knowledge. And either way, I was standing in the wreckage of something I hadn't seen coming. I went to the RCMP with my lawyer beside me. I brought the tracker. I brought the email chain. I brought the timeline I'd put together. Dates when my daughter had visited and asked about property. Dates when the blue sedan had appeared. Dates when my son-in-law had made offhand remarks about estate planning. The officer I spoke to was a woman, probably late 30s, calm in the way that people in that job have to be calm. She asked me careful questions. She took everything I brought her. She said, "This is more common than you think. I want you to know that." She said it like she thought it would help. And honestly, it did. Not because I wanted to be part of a statistic, but because it meant there were people who knew how to handle this. People who had seen it before. What followed was 3 months I would not wish on anyone. The RCMP investigation moved quietly, which I was grateful for. I was asked not to change my behavior, to keep taking my car out on the same routes, to keep seeing my daughter the same way. I hosted Sunday dinner twice during those months. I sat across the table from my son-in-law, and passed him the roast potatoes and asked about the kids' hockey, and did not let anything show on my face. That was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the legal uncertainty. The table, the ordinary furniture of family life, set against what I now knew was happening underneath it. My daughter. I still don't know how much she knew. That's the honest answer. The investigation turned up a paper trail that went back 14 months. My son-in-law had been, according to what eventually came out, under significant financial pressure. His firm had flagged irregularities in some client accounts. He was facing a regulatory review. He had debts I hadn't known about, and my daughter may not have fully known about either. The house in Barrie had a second mortgage. The respect accounts for the grandkids were nearly empty. Not because they'd stopped contributing, but because he'd redirected the contributions. He had, according to his own admission in the eventual proceeding, been planning to use the forged power of attorney to transfer my RRSP holdings incrementally over 18 months. Small enough amounts each time to stay below automatic review thresholds. He'd done research on it. He'd been methodical. He'd put a GPS tracker on my car so he could know when I was away from home and manage the timing of correspondence. When the RCMP came for him, it was a Tuesday morning. My friend had just arrived for coffee. I heard about it through my lawyer 2 hours later. My daughter called me that afternoon. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she hadn't known about the power of attorney. She said she hadn't known about the tracker. She said she was sorry. She kept saying she was sorry, and I sat in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. I still don't. Fully. The legal process took most of a year. My son-in-law was charged with fraud over $5,000, forgery, and unauthorized use of a document. He pleaded guilty to the fraud charge and 2 others in a plea agreement. He received a sentence of 4 years with eligibility for parole after serving 1/3. He was also ordered to repay legal costs and was permanently barred from working in financial services in Canada. My daughter was not charged. The evidence did not support that she had prior knowledge of the forged document, though the Crown reviewed it carefully. I believe her when she says she didn't know about the power of attorney. I believe her less completely about other things, about how much she knew of his financial situation, about certain conversations they had that she has described to me in the months since. But believing someone and trusting them again are two different things, and I'm still working out the distance between those 2 points. The grandkids are doing well. She's moved back to Barrie with them and she's working now, which she hadn't done while she was married to him. She calls me every Sunday. Sometimes I call first. My friend helped me get the tracker sent to the RCMP as evidence before all of this started. I thought about sending it somewhere just to mess with whoever was watching. My friend had joked about mailing it to his brother-in-law in Whitehorse. We laughed about that for longer than was probably warranted. In the end, we handed it over properly, which was the right thing to do, though I sometimes think about it sailing north on a cargo flight and the look on someone's face watching a GPS dot move steadily toward the Yukon. I've had my lawyers set up a properly structured trust now. It's something I should have done after my wife died, and if you're reading this and you have assets and aging parents, or you are the aging parent, please talk to an estate lawyer. An independent one who works for you, not for the family. Make sure your power of attorney documents are current, properly witnessed, and filed somewhere safe. The machinery of elder financial abuse is more sophisticated than most people realize, and the people who use it know how to be patient. That's not why I'm telling this story though. I'm telling it because last March I drove out to the conservation area on my own. It was a Thursday, which is not my usual Tuesday, and I parked and walked out to the lookout where you can see the whole spread of the valley below, and I stood there for a long time in the cold. And I thought about my wife's handwriting on those boxes in the garage. How careful she was. How she documented everything because she believed things were worth keeping track of. I'm 67 years old. I have a paid-off house and a good friend who shows up every Tuesday and grandchildren who think I make the best scrambled eggs in Simcoe County. I don't need revenge. I needed the truth and I got it. And now I'm trying to figure out what you do with the family once you've seen the parts of it that don't hold together in the light. Most days I think you just keep showing up. You keep passing the potatoes. You keep answering the phone on Sunday. You stay awake to the possibility that people can be more than the worst thing they did. And you also stay awake to the possibility that trust, once it's been forged, and I mean that word deliberately, is never quite the same shape again. But you keep going. That's the only thing I know for certain. You keep going. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with a GPS tracker in front of me, this small, unremarkable black device, and I'm thinking about all the Sunday dinners I'd cooked, all the times I'd passed the potatoes, all the conversations I'd had with my son-in-law about the grandkids' hockey schedules, about the weather, about nothing in particular, while somewhere underneath everything he was running a different calculation entirely. What I've come to understand is that the people who take advantage of trust don't usually look like threats. They look like family. They show up in your kitchen and drink your coffee and ask careful questions. And you mistake the questions for love because you want to. Because wanting to is easier than seeing clearly. I wasn't naive. I'd worked 31 years in municipal government. I'd sat across tables from people who wanted things they weren't entitled to. But I'd never thought to apply that same attention to my own front door. That's the honest truth of it. I lowered my guard at home in a way I never would have elsewhere. And that gap between the alertness I brought to the outside world and the openness I kept for family was exactly the gap he was counting on. What stopped it wasn't luck. It was my friend noticing what I hadn't and me being willing to listen instead of dismiss. It was my lawyer asking the right question at the right moment. It was me deciding, in that driveway on a cold February morning, that knowing the truth mattered more than protecting the version of my family I wanted to believe in. That took something. I don't say that to congratulate myself. I say it because I know how easy it would have been to put the tracker back and not think about it, to let the discomfort pass, to choose the comfortable story over the accurate one. The forged document. The financial trail going back 14 months. None of that happens without patience on his part, and none of it gets uncovered without patience on mine. I had to hold what I knew very quietly for a very long time and let the process work. That's harder than it sounds when what you know is that someone sitting at your table has decided your life's work is something they're entitled to take. My daughter calls every Sunday now. We don't talk about what happened. Not directly. Not yet. Maybe someday. What I know is that she's working, she's managing, the kids are doing well in school, and something in her voice when she calls sounds more like herself than it did during those years she was with him. That matters to me. I have the trust set up now. Independent executor, properly documented, reviewed by a lawyer who has never met anyone in my family except me. I'm telling you this not as legal advice, but as someone who learned the hard way that good intentions are not the same as good structure. The people who love you deserve clarity. And if someone doesn't love you, if someone is simply waiting, clarity is the one thing that protects you. I think about my wife's handwriting on those boxes in the garage. How she kept records because she believed things were worth accounting for. I think she would have seen it sooner than I did. She was sharper about people. But I got there. And getting there even late is still getting there. You keep your eyes open. You stay honest with yourself about what you're seeing even when it's hard. And when the people around you notice something you have missed, you listen. That's the whole of it.